Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we've got a sensational show today. Hope everyone has slowly recovered from the holidays and everyone enjoyed their Christmas whatever way you celebrated. It was a very unusual year celebrating for sure. I was only home for a few days and then had to head back, but it was still nice to see my family and catch up with them nonetheless. But diving into the episode today, we have a lot to go over and discuss, so I'll get right into it. And I'll first jump into some news and any latest developments in the MLB world, and especially with the free agency frenzy that's been going on over the last few weeks. I'll then get into grading some teams' offseason moves so far. I'll select a couple teams that I have been very impressed with and some other teams that I've been very disappointed in, and hand out gradings for their different offseason moves. Afterward, I'll discuss which teams in 2021 might face some major setbacks based on players they might be losing or deals that were made that didn't go in favor of one team and so on. I'll share the teams I think we could see take a few steps backwards instead of forwards. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into discussing which pitching duos in baseball are the best right now and what kind of damage they've done so far in their careers. So another jam-packed show today. Really glad everyone could find a good seat and has joined me today. But again, getting into it, there's been a ton of news going around. Definitely some murmurs and rumors, as usual, during this free agency time, all sorts of stuff flying around, but there's also been some trade rumors, and one of those trade rumors is a supposed trade for Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray of the Cincinnati Reds. Now, this would be very interesting because the Reds, again, last offseason, they made some great moves. They got Nick Castellanos, they got Mike Moustakas, then midway through last season, they got Trevor Bauer, so they made some great moves a year ago, and they really kind of set themselves up for a great season this year. Obviously, COVID-19 spoiled that a little bit. They still made the playoffs for the first time since, I believe, 2013 or 2014, so they definitely did something different that they have not done in many, many years, but I don't think it was the same result that they wanted, right? I think that we all kind of, especially myself, I went into it saying this Cincinnati Reds team, they might win the division, and they were not even close. Again, they were, kind of close, but that was one of the worst divisions in baseball this past year in the NL Central, so I don't think the Reds had a whole lot of competition to really deal with. But again, getting into this rumor, really, if Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray and also Trevor Bauer are all gone by next season, that's three major arms in that pitching rotation that would be gone. And that would be some big holes for the Cincinnati Reds to fill, because that was, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other people would probably agree, one of the best, if not the best, three-man starting rotations in baseball. Obviously, you've got a five-man starting rotation, but out of your top three options, that was arguably the best right there in terms of just performance this past season. The team was 7th in team ERA. They were 2nd in team Ks, 5th in team WHIP. So this was a team that really thrived on the mound this past season. And having Bauer most likely gone, again, he rejected his qualifying offer, and then Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo maybe be, the center of some trades, that could really open some holes into this Cincinnati Reds lineup and this Cincinnati Reds rotation especially. And it's not going to look great because hitting-wise, they did not do very well at all hitting-wise. They had some really struggling seasons from Mike Moustakas and Eugenio Suarez. Nick Castellanos, he started out like he got shot out of a cannon, and then halfway through the season, something happened. I don't know if he slipped on the banana peel or what, but it was just a completely different trend and not in the right direction. But Castillo's coming off a huge year. At 89 Ks, a 3.21 ERA. Sonny Gray, same thing. He was 5-3 at 3.7 ERA, 72 Ks. Great seasons for both of them. So they'll, for sure, if they do wind up at the center of a trade, they'll definitely find, themselves possibly on a contending team because of just how good of a season they had last year. There's some landing spots that I would say might be more suitable for them than others, the Giants being one of them. Obviously, San Francisco's looking for some pitching. They definitely have a lot of holes in that rotation. They did add back Kevin Gausman. They lost Drew Smyly. I know Jeff Samardzij's contract is up next year, so they could be in kind of, the works for possibly some pitching. The Kansas City Royals, another possible landing spot. I mean, that team has just been incredibly aggressive all offseason long. They've made some great moves. They've gotten some great pieces, and they already went out some veteran arms. Maybe they bring in some more youthful arms, some guys that are coming off some really good years, maybe some guys that they could develop for, and at least have for 5, 6, 7 seasons instead of, Mike Minor sort of on the tail end of his career. Greg Holland might be on his way out as well. So, instead of getting these guys that are aging out, get these other guys that are kind of ascending through the MLB right now. Also, the Yankees, I mean, that would be a clear-cut, obvious one. I mean, they could pay them way more than they probably should get, A. And then, B, they could also give up some decent pieces for those two pitchers to the Reds if they wanted to. And not to mention, I mean, Brian Cashman said it. He is looking to go and upgrade the pitching because they need some other arm to try and balance out that Garrett Cole aspect that they've got on the mound, because if not, it's a very one-dimensional pitching rotation. It really is. So whoever gets these two will, without a doubt, have some incredible arms that could, again, do some major damage against some teams, but we'll have to see, and I'm going to watch that closely, because if this Reds team comes back next year, missing 3 of their top starters, and then also Mike Moustakas and Nick Castellanos maybe not playing that great, not to mention they also lost Raisel Iglesias in a trade, so they are really, I think, in kind of in the line of business for a pitcher, because right now it looks like each and every single day it's getting bleaker and bleaker for the guys on the mound on that team, because who knows if they're going to be around or not, and then if they aren't, what are they going to do to upgrade that? So things in Cincinnati might not be on the greatest kind of trend, but we'll have to see where that goes. But again, sticking with Sonny Gray, he's actually been directly recently linked to a team in regards to this rumor of him, being traded or potentially going to get traded. And it's reported that the San Diego Padres are looking to get Gray from the Reds. And it's actually a team that makes a little bit of sense to me, because Mike Clevenger's out this whole season. He has to get Tommy John, so he's going to be out the entirety of 2021. So they could get somebody, for maybe a year or two just to try and fill that void until Clevenger can come back into full health. But this is a team that's also known for making major moves. I mean, the Padres, they made some great moves during the trade deadline, went out and got Mitch Moreland, a heavy bat in the lineup, a DH bat in the lineup, also a good first baseman. They also went and got Austin Nola for behind the plate, which is another wise move. So this is a Padres team that I think they can smell the opportunity that they have. This is a very, very, I don't want to say it's a small window that they have, but they do have probably about, I would say, 2, 3, maybe 4 years to really try and make a push towards a major playoff run before some of these really talented young guys like Fernando Tatis, Will Myers, Jake Cronenworth, they start to, their contracts go up, and then all of a sudden they explore free agency, and now the Padres could be back to square one. So going out and getting, some solid pitching for them this upcoming year to really fill that missing piece of Clevenger since he's out this year, I think is a very wise thing for them to do. And again, it's a unique team that the Padres have. It's a mixture of youth and kind of some veteran leadership, of some veteran arms here and there. They've got some youthful bats. So it's a nicely balanced team. And, I mean, they do want to try and, reduce their spending a little bit this year. And honestly, Sonny Gray would fit right into that thinking, because he's guaranteed $20 million over the next 2 years. So $10 million here, $10 million there, $15 million here, $5 million there. However you want to do it, I think he would be a great pickup for the Padres. I would just be curious what they would give up for him, right? I mean, they've got a great farm system, so they could maybe, the Reds, who knows, they might just cash in, say, all right, we're going to get rid of our top 3 arms. We're going to just start developing. We've got, a couple veteran bats in the lineup that could maybe do some damage. But we're just going to go back to, rebuilding kind of. This was our opportunity this past year. Did not look really great, but it's going to work out in the end. Who knows what the Reds will do? Who knows what the Padres will do? But Sonny Gray, I have a really weird feeling he's going to be on the move very, very soon. Sooner rather than later, honestly. Because if not, again, the Reds, they're going to have to scramble around and try and find that main ace piece for next year. Maybe it can be Castillo. Maybe it can be Gray. Who knows? But the likelihood of Trevor Bauer coming back is very, very small. And the Padres, again, they're in need of a pitcher with Clevenger being out. So Gray might be going to San Diego. Who knows? But there's also another member of the Reds. We've really been hammering home the Cincinnati Reds here in this segment. And actually, this other Reds player that he's also been linked to some trade talks as well, and that is the starting third baseman who I briefly mentioned earlier, Eugenio Suarez, as his name has been linked to the Washington Nationals as a potential trade destination kind of landing spot. And honestly, Suarez was not great in 2020. I mean, he was pretty bad. He batted .202. He did have 15 homers and 38 RBIs, but he had a .781 OPS, which was a massive drop-off from his 2019 season. I mean, 2019, he had a huge year. 49 home runs. He had over 100 RBIs. He had a .930 OPS and a .132 OPS plus. So a guy that can do a lot of damage when he is on a roll. He is capable of really putting up, I would say, some sensational numbers. But again, the team that is wanting him, the Nationals, I think that they could really benefit from having that bat in the lineup. I know that Rizzo has gone out and said that they're looking for kind of a third bat to really balance out that middle of the lineup, which I think is a great move. I mean, again, you've got Soto and Turner, but then after that, it really drops off. So they do need that third bat. They need another guy to put right in the middle, that 4, 5, 6 hole, try and even out this lineup a little bit. And over at third, Carter Kieboom, I mean, he's been okay. Less than spectacular season, I would say, last year. Again, batted .202, didn't have any home runs, 9 RBIs, and 5 of 56 OPS. But he has potential. I mean, a young guy that could develop with the Reds, that could wind up having a really nice career in Cincinnati if this trade were to go through. But I know that, the Nationals, they've talked about wanting to get someone like Marcell Ozuna. So they're in this right kind of trend and this right direction, I would say, of trying to find that really powerful, heavy bat that can produce a lot of runs, that can produce a lot of offense for them overall. And I think that if they can get Suarez, things are going to be on the up and up for Washington. I know that Howie Kendrick has recently retired also, so wishing nothing but luck to Howie Kendrick in retirement. So they're definitely looking to fill some sort of void because, I mean, Kendrick, about a year ago, he was the NLCS MVP, so he's not far removed from playing some great baseball. So they definitely want to try and bring that back up a little bit in the nation's capital. And if they can get someone like Suarez, I mean, that would be huge. A guy that's capable of hitting nearly 50 home runs and having a 100 RBI season, I think that would be a really, really great get for them. Obviously, they would give up Kieboom, but I don't know who else they would give up. I will say this. What I could see kind of kicking in almost a domino effect, if you will, is if the Reds go out and trade either Gray or Castillo, and then they also decide to trade Eugenio Suarez to the Nationals could cough up a couple prospects in the pitching department. Or they could just give up a couple pitchers themselves and also Kieboom and say, hey, we're giving you a third baseman to develop, and we're giving you some pitching because we know that you got rid of either Castillo or Gray, and we know that Trevor Bauer walked during free agency. So I think all in all, this would be a very interesting move for both teams. I think that this would be a little bit more interesting than the Sonny Gray going to the San Diego Padres because I think that the Padres have plenty of arms. They've got plenty of firepower. But over in the nation's capital, a little bit different. I think that they are definitely in a more dire need for that heavy bat in their lineup because, I mean, they're coming off a year where, they were a solid hitting team. They weren't, like, sensational, I would say, but they were a pretty solid hitting team mainly because of Trey Turner and Juan Soto. And if you, again, if you're an opposing pitcher, you're probably only really worried about those two guys when you have to face the Nationals. Now you have to factor in if they go out and get a guy like Eugenio Suarez, now there's a third guy there, and you definitely have to pay a little bit of attention to him because he can do a lot of damage. So, again, the Reds have been all over the news, I would say, just kind of rumblings and murmurs and rumors just floating around, nothing crazy. But another team, the Twins, have actually finally made their way to the trade headlines with their desire to get a solid glove and bat over at shortstop. They already have Jorge Polanco over at short, who is coming off a great 2019 season. But they've drawn interest about one of their top prospects, Luis Arias. And Arias is, I think, on his way to having an insane career. I mean, the guy is going to be really, really good. In 32 games this past season in 2020 for the Twins, he batted an incredible .321. He didn't have any home runs. He had 13 RBIs and a .765 OPS. So clearly a slap hitter, a guy that's going to hit for contact, but there's always a need for that. There's never going to not be a need for a guy that can produce hits and get on base and then potentially set up for scoring runs for the next 2 or 3 batters down the lineup. So, I mean, the Twins have been very quiet this offseason. I mean, I think that, they need to make a big splash. I think that they need to make a big move because if not, I mean, this could be a team that sees a major setback next year. And I'm going to get into it a little bit later in the show. But I do worry about this team. I mean, I thought had a pretty solid year this past season. They were in a very competitive division, but I don't see them making the necessary moves that they need to make. Nelson Cruz is going to be a free agent. He's a free agent right now, so who knows if he signs with Minnesota again. If not, I mean, that's a huge hole in their lineup. But I will say, if they go out and they trade Arias, they could get some solid pieces with him because he's got so much potential. But the question is, what will they do with Jorge Polanco? And Polanco is coming off a 2019 All-Star season, batted above 280 and above, I would say, in both 2018 and 2019. So they could actually move him. They could trade him over to somewhere. I mean, a team that jumps right into mind that needs a shortstop, the Philadelphia Phillies. You move Polanco over to Philadelphia. Who knows what you get in return? But then you have an opportunity to either move Arias up to that shortstop position and make him that everyday starter, or you trade him, one of the two. Another name that's really been floating around the Twins is Marcus Simeon. Simeon is also either a free agent this year or next year. I think it's this year. And he could definitely strengthen the Twins, especially in the hitting department. I mean, he's coming off a year or two ago being third in the MVP, batted .292, had over 30 home runs, or just about 30 home runs, and over 90 RBIs. So definitely could fill the void if Nelson Cruz walks and he's no longer with the team. But I would love to see what the Twins do. I really think that they need to make some moves sooner rather than later, because this is a division that they're going to really, I think, struggle in if they don't, because the White Sox have made necessary moves. I know the Indians, they are kind of wishy-washy, I would say, right now with me, because they've expressed that they want to definitely save some money for next year. They don't want to go out and spend a whole bunch of money. They're trying to unload Francisco Lindor, which I think is a wise move if they're trying to save money. He's owed over $20 million this upcoming year. So if they can try and somehow, some way find some pieces that kind of, if they do, let's say the Indians do trade Lindor, right? They're going to have to really, who knows, maybe a little cross-division trade. The Twins send over Jorge Polanco, they get Lindor, something like that. Who knows? But the Indians, they also have to address the outfield hitting that really struggled. So I think that this Twins team, if they can make the wise moves, it could just literally be them and the White Sox in the division. Maybe the Royals. I'm really kind of high up on the Royals right now, but I have no idea if they're going to actually have these moves pay off for them this upcoming year, because, I mean, who knows? Carlos Santana's not coming off a great year. Mike Minor is getting older, but I will say I really like their moves overall. So the Twins are in an interesting spot. They can definitely make a couple, runs at it if they want, try and get some good pieces, because if not, this White Sox team, I think we all know they're going to run the AL Central this upcoming year. But if the Twins can try and add some pieces and really give a little bit of competition to the White Sox, I don't think they'll have to worry about a team like the Indians, and they definitely won't have to worry about the Tigers. The only other team they might have to worry about, I would say, is the Royals, and that's a big if. So the Twins need to start capitalizing on this opportunity they have, because if not, it's going to be the White Sox running away with the AL Central next year. So a lot of different things going on in baseball right now, a lot of different possibilities and kind of rumors that may or may not unfold. We'll have to see, and I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on these developments, because when these different developments, if they do break and if they do come true, again, I think it's going to be a groundbreaking day on the social media world. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'm going to get into my off-season gradings for the different teams in the MLB. I'll share which teams I have been impressed with and which I haven't been impressed with, and hand out some gradings for each team. So, folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got into discussing some of the latest news going around the league and some major trade rumors that are really starting to bubble up here these last few days. make sure you stay right here for the final segment of the show today, as I will get into discussing the best pitching duos in baseball and which two-man tandems have been the best in the MLB over the last few years. But I want to get into grading some of these offseason moves by teams, because some teams have been more quiet than others, I would say, and there have been some teams that I feel could make some serious pushes after the new year. Really, I think that there's some teams that I think have been lacking a little bit and that they need to really turn on the jets here in the next couple weeks, next couple months, because before you know it, we're going to have spring training, and then it's going to be too late. So there's a few teams I'm going to highlight here. The first one being the Texas Rangers. I'm going to go ahead and give them a C+ so far. I love the fact that they picked up David Dahl. I think that was a really wise move. I know he's coming off a really poor year where he batted .183. He didn't have any home runs. He had a .470 OPS. I will say he only played in 24 games, so he played in about a third of the season. So going to go ahead and say that, again, this past season was probably a scratch year, kind of like a lot of other guys, because, again, 2019, he had an all-star season, batted .302, had an .877 OPS, so that OPS dropped 400 points, that average dropped over 100 points. A lot of things kind of dipped down for David Dahl, but they got him on a one-year, $3 million deal, which I think is very ideal, and I think that, who knows, this can really be a player that I think could have a major impact on this team, and again, got him for a bargain. So I think that was a great move. He would be a great outfield fit with him and Joey Gallo, but I will say again, Gallo, another guy coming off a tough year, batted 181 this past season, 10 homers and 26 RBIs. So if he can get back to the Joey Gallo of 2019, 2018, same thing with David Dahl, that's going to be a pretty heavy outfield hitting-wise. Now, they clearly need to have probably another bat in the lineup, I would say. I think they really need to go out and get some more hitting. They had 5 of their first 9 guys this year in the starting lineup bat under 200. So when you've got over half of your starters batting below the Mendoza line, I think that's a sign that you might need to go out and get some more hitting. They did do that with David Dahl, but I would like to see a little bit more aggressiveness, trying and getting guys to really fill out that lineup, because if not, this is just going to be another struggling year in Texas. They also unloaded Rafael Monteiro to the Angels. Not sure how I feel about the move. I mean, I think Monteiro was a very good arm out of the pen. He had a 4.08 ERA this year, but he had a team-high 8 saves, and then in 2019, he had a 2.48 ERA with 34 Ks in 29 innings. So, again, was more of a reliever in 2019 than a closer like he was in 2020, but I think that he would have been a great arm for them to have coming out of the bullpen. And no matter what, having that type of, power, and not only that, but also just talent, being able to come in, those middle innings, 5, 6, 7 innings, being able to, really try and work out of certain jams or try and move through into the next inning, whatever it might be, Monteiro is going to be that guy. And I really kind of question why they unloaded him. So I definitely think that they need to really stick with pitching. Again, unloading not only Monteiro, but as we all know, Lance Lynn. So 2 big-time pitchers going down off their roster, not being a part of the team anymore. That's going to be a really big hole for them to try and fill. I seriously believe that. I think that David Dahl being picked up definitely is a great move. I was a big fan of that, but I just think that getting rid of Lance Lynn, getting rid of Monteiro, they need to address the pitching, but they need to keep going after the hitting, because if not, David Dahl's not going to get it done for them. Neither is Joey Gallo, and both of them aren't going to get it done for them. They need to get a 3rd, 4th batter, and I'm not saying somebody that's going to have a huge season. I'm not talking about an MVP caliber player. I'm talking about somebody that can at least just bring at least a 270 average, maybe an 800 OPS, 750 OPS, and knock in a couple runs. That's it. Just bolstering the overall presence in the lineup, because right now it is incredibly thin and it is incredibly lacking. So I'm giving the Rangers a C+. Going into my next team, Kansas City Royals, and for anybody that's been listening to the show, I think you can probably guess where I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to give them an A-. I love the moves they've been making so far. They go out and get Michael A. Taylor to fill that void of defense in the outfield since Alex Gordon retired. They go out and get Carlos Santana, a little bit of power in their lineup, Mike Minor and Greg Holland, 2 very good arms, veteran leaders to have, both coming as starters and out of the bullpen. So I think they did a nice job so far. And again, we're not even, to January, to February. We're a couple months out from that. And I know that I was saying earlier, some of these teams need to pick up the pace a little bit because time's a ticking. But the Royals, they got out to a great start, so I don't think that they have to feel as rushed. Greg Holland, again, a great re-sign for them, coming off a huge, huge year. I mean, in 2020, he had a 1.91 ERA. In 28 and a third innings, he had 31 Ks and 7 walks. He's been an all-star in 2013, 2014, and 2017. So definitely a guy that is going to have some power and a little bit of, force coming out of the bullpen. They're definitely going to have a guy that is a reliable arm to try and get them out of some jams in the 7th inning or the 8th inning. Holland has proved himself of doing that, and I definitely think that if they can at least, go out and maybe get another arm, definitely get another bat. I would say that would be the biggest thing this year, or this offseason, is they need to get another bat. I don't think that Michael A. Taylor and Carlos Santana are enough. Definitely don't think Michael A. Taylor is enough. I mean, there's a joke in D.C. If Michael A. Taylor, he was called Michael K. Taylor because he struck out all the time. So I definitely think that they need to go out and get a little bit more hitting, because it's not just going to get done by those two guys. Santana's definitely going to have a lot to do with it, and you obviously still have, Perez behind the plate, so that's a great sign. And I just think that, overall, these have been some solid moves. Now, Kansas City this past year was 12th in team ERA, so I think that going out and getting those added veteran arms, really wise, not to mention losing Rosenthal during the trade deadline. I think that was another wise thing for them to do. So I definitely am very happy that they made a couple of those moves, because I think that if they hadn't, again, they would probably be in the same, boat that the Minnesota Twins are in right now, not making any moves, and things aren't really trending in the right direction for them. I'm curious to see if they make a big push for maybe a huge trade. So let's say they go out and get a guy like Luis Castillo or Sonny Gray. Definitely need a little bit more of that starting pitching to round itself out, and I think that they could definitely make a case for that. They've got a great farm system, so they definitely have pieces that they could offer up. But then also out in the outfield, maybe try and get a little bit more defense, try and get a little bit more help out there. Bubba Starling, he was lackluster at best in 2020 as their center fielder, batted 169 with a home run and 5 RBIs. And Michael A. Taylor, I don't think is that great of a replacement from the plate, so maybe they make a charge at Jackie Bradley Jr. Who knows? Maybe they sign him to a small contract. But I think overall, they're definitely going to be a sneaky team as this offseason continues to unfold. And I'm really excited to see what they do, because if the Twins and the Indians and the Tigers still remain quiet as they have for the last couple months, and really the last couple weeks, I would say, then it might be a battle between the Royals and the White Sox in the division. I mean, crazy as that sounds, that's what 2021 might have in store for us, so who knows? But I'm going to give them an A- because I like the aggressiveness that they've had so far, not to mention as a team that was one of the worst teams in baseball, they've really tried to make up some ground for 2021 and are trying to put themselves into a better position. So love what the Royals are doing. Getting into my next team now, the San Francisco Giants. And honestly, I'm kind of wishy-washy with some of their moves. All in all, I would probably give them a B-. That would be my overall grade. And they really went out after pitching, and I think they did a nice job of that. They picked up Anthony DeScalfini. He had a great 2019. Again, another guy that catapulted in 2019 and then plummeted in 2020. I mean, in 2019, DeScalfini had a 3.8 ERA, 167 Ks in 162 and two-thirds innings, only 49 walks. So a guy that is definitely coming off a very good year. A couple of their scouts, actually, in the Giants department, and a couple of their coaches were very high on DeScalfini, and they said, yeah, he did have a rough 2020, but 2019, he was a totally different animal, and he had a really good year. So we're going to try and ride that kind of momentum and not really worry about 2020. So that was a wise move, I think, by them. They also got Kevin Gossman back for another year. He accepted his qualifying offer. So another guy that had a below 4 ERA, 3.6, 79 Ks, and 59 and two-thirds innings. So they definitely have done a nice job at fixing that pitching, because it really suffered in 2020. I mean, it was the 18th ranked team ERA in the MLB. They finished 24th in team Ks, and bringing in 2 strong pitchers is exactly what they needed to do. Not to mention, they also lost Drew Smyly in the offseason, so they definitely have to fill that void. But this Giants team, I think, is going to be very, very interesting in the offseason of 2021, because this is why. Jeff Samardzija is going to be a free agent. Brandon Crawford is going to be a free agent. Brandon Belt is going to be a free agent. So they're going to have some holes around their lineup that they're going to need to fill. And I bring up Crawford because he's their shortstop. And what do we have next year in the offseason? One of the biggest free agencies with shortstops probably in the last couple of years. I mean, you're going to have, if I'm not mistaken, Javi Baez, you're going to have Trevor Story, Francisco Lindor. If Marcus Simeon's not a free agent this year, he's definitely one next year. You're going to have a couple big-name shortstops that are going to be on the market. And so I think the Giants are clearly a team that could pay that, and they could definitely pay for some really high-powered offensive shortstops. So this could be a year where maybe the Giants try and prepare themselves for 2022. They try and look way down the future because they are going to have some holes to fill. They are going to have some spots in the lineup that they're going to have to address just because of the impending free agent contracts or the impending contracts that will be up and allowing these players to be free agents. But I think that what they really need to do is they need to go after some more hitting and especially in the outfield. I mean, if the universal DH goes, they're going to have to do something about the DH because they had one of the worst DH OPSs in baseball. But the outfield hitting was pretty solid with their OPS. So, I mean, they've got, Yastrzemski. Mike Yastrzemski's been really good since he's been called up to the majors. Donovan Solano's coming off a very good year. I really liked him. I thought he was sensational for them. Assuming that things with COVID get better, Buster Posey will be back in 2021. So that's another thing for them to look forward to. So this Giants team, I think, is slowly trying to work their way back, I think, into that contending championship-level baseball team that they are capable of being. Because right now, I think they're looking down the road really far, and they know that they're going to have to address some lineup issues next year. So whatever they might do, I think it's going to be very interesting. But I think that if they go out and get another bat, a heavy bat at least, this could be a playoff contending team because the pitching's been pretty solid. I would like to maybe see them, I don't know if they would get rid of Johnny Cato. I mean, he hasn't been great. He's getting older, 35, 36, had a 5.33 ERA last year. So a guy that is definitely on his way out of his career. So who knows, maybe they get a piece for him down the road, but I definitely want to see them get a bat. I think they need to get another solid hitter, but overall, I'll give them a B-. Now, my next team, the Chicago White Sox, again, very similar to the Kansas City Royals. I think we all know where I'm going with this one. I'm giving them an overall A grade. I think they've done a sensational job this year, really just going out and getting Lance Lynn. I mean, that's, I think, what they needed to do. They needed to get that third arm in their rotation. It was very clear when they were playing the Athletics that it was a huge drop-off. After Giolito and Keuchel, things really plummeted in terms of performance and just level of talent in their starting rotation. And that was probably ultimately what led to their downfall in the playoffs because they had arguably, in my opinion, the worst performance in the playoffs and most disappointing because of how good they were in the regular season, and they completely flounder in the wild card in the wild card series. So I think that having Lynn there, it's going to be a great add. You already have Dallas Keuchel, you already have Lucas Giolito, and Keuchel's coming off both of them are coming off great years. Keuchel had a 1.99 ERA. He was 6-2, 42 Ks, but then Lucas Giolito, he was 4-3, had a little bit of a higher ERA with a 3.48 ERA, but he had 97 Ks. He was one of the highest strikeout pitchers in baseball. And then Lance Lynn, I mean, that's a lot of depth. He led the entire MLB this year in innings pitched, and the guy is 33, 34, approaching 35. And so for a guy that, is getting older and getting a little bit up in age, it's pretty sensational that he was able to have the stamina and the durability to last the entire season like that. Not to mention, this White Sox team, they like to leave their guys in. I mean, they were fourth in innings pitched by innings pitched by pitchers in the MLB last year. So definitely a team that I think it lines up well with what Lance Lynn can do and what he can bring to the table. The hitting is clearly not a problem, right? I mean, you've got Jose Abreu being the reigning MVP, Tim Anderson, who's a batting champion not too long ago, coming off a Silver Slugger year, Eloy Jimenez, same thing, Nick Madrigal, Yohan Moncada, who had a down year this past year, but then the year before, he had an insane season. So they're all players that can do some serious damage in the lineup. And I'm very curious what Tony La Russa will bring to the table. What kind of impact will La Russa have? I mean, La Russa, I saw a stat. I believe he's the third ever manager to take over a professional baseball team as the manager that is over the age of 75. He's the third person to ever do it. He's 76, 77 years old. So his style of baseball is a little outdated, I'm assuming. I know he's held other positions in baseball, kind of in front office the past couple years, and in scouting and so on and so forth. But again, he comes from a totally different time in baseball. Totally different time. Last time he managed a game was in 2011. So clearly a guy that's been a little bit out of baseball. I don't want to say he's been out of touch, but I don't know how in tune and kind of hands-on he's been with some of these teams that he's been involved with in the past few seasons. Because, again, this is a new day and age in baseball. So I'm very curious to see what kind of impact he'll have. But all in all, love the moves that the White Sox have been making. I think that they've done a sensational job. And again, I think that they, as of right now, they're my favorites in the AL. I'm going to say that right now. Again, this is before the season even starts. So if that happens, I'll come back to this part of the show and use it as kind of proof. But who knows? But I definitely think that the White Sox can make a lot of noise in the AL this season. So the next team I want to discuss, the Atlanta Braves, I'm going to go and give them a similar grade to the San Francisco Giants with their offseason moves. I'm going to give them a B-. I think that they did what they needed to do. They went out, they got veteran pitching. Very similar to what the White Sox did, but I will say what's different about the Braves is that they're losing one of their main hitters from this past season. They're losing Marcell Ozuna. And Ozuna has, in my opinion, again, I think this might be, again, a little bit of a hot take, I don't know, but he might be the most highly sought-after position player and non-pitcher free agent this offseason. I mean, I've heard as many as 10 teams have shown interest in Marcell Ozuna in one way or another. So he's definitely somebody that players or teams are trying to go after. Not to mention, I mean, the guy had an NL high 18 home runs. He had an NL high 56 RBIs. He batted .338. Way over 1,000 OPS. The guy had an insane season across the board. So no wonder he's got 10 teams, calling him and asking if he wants to come and play for their team. But what they did, what the Atlanta Braves did, went out, got Charlie Morton, and I think that's what they needed. Again, very similar to the White Sox. They needed that third arm because it was very clear in the playoffs. Again, really being able to see that since the microscope is so fine, they really dropped off after Max Fried and Ian Anderson. And Anderson was untouchable this past playoffs. So and Fried was lights out as well. I mean, at one point or another, the Braves had won 13 straight games that Fried had started. So 13 straight starts by Fried, not necessarily all wins by him, but the Braves still won. So that just shows the impact he's got overall. Ian Anderson, again, let up little to no runs the entire playoffs. Going out and getting Charlie Morton is going to be a very key, and it is a very key thing they did that, because now he brings veteran leadership, he brings experience, he brings what they need. They're lacking in experience. They didn't have anybody to really come up in the clutch for them the moment it mattered the most, and when they were a win away from the World Series, they could not get that last win because they didn't have that arm in the lineup that had been there and that had done that, and that's exactly what Charlie Morton has done. He's been there. He's got one of the best winning percentages as a pitcher in do-or-die, win-or-go-home playoff games over the last couple years. And as we all know, he was instrumental in the Astros World Series run. He's been instrumental in the Rays' success the last couple years. So this is a guy that I think is going to pay off very well with them, and I think that he could do a lot of good for them. I think that they need to go out and get a bat. Again, I think that they need to fill that void that Marcell Ozuna is going to leave, because it's going to be a very noticeable void that he's going to leave. So if they can go out and get somebody else that's got a solid bat, they might have to move their lineup around a little bit, but they honestly have a lot of pieces for the future. This has been a wise Atlanta team. Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr., Dansby Swanson, Freddie Freeman being the leader of that charge. This is going to be a team that's going to be really fun to watch, I think, the next 2-3 seasons. And if they can go and get, some more pitching, obviously, again, two young, very up-and-coming pitchers in Max Fried and Ian Anderson, if they can go out and get another arm besides Charlie Morton, and if they can go get another bat, I mean, this Atlanta team is going to be really good. I honestly compare the Atlanta Braves to the Chicago White Sox. The Braves are the NL version of the White Sox. They've got a lot of potential. They've got a lot of pieces. They're a pretty well-balanced team. They're just missing that one thing. And at least for me, since, again, growing up in the D.C. area, you start to pay a little bit more attention to Atlanta Braves baseball because you're seeing your team go up against them X amount of times every single season. They're definitely just missing that one piece because they've been good before. They've been talented. They have been right there with the Nationals and wanting to get the division in the last probably 5 seasons, I would say. So it's just a matter of them getting that one more piece. And I think that's exactly what they need. And then they'll be set from there. So I'm excited to see what the Braves do. But then the last team living in Pittsburgh, I have to touch on them, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I am just very disappointed in them right now. I just don't think that they've done what they needed to do. I'm giving them a D-, and this is why. They've been super quiet. They've been incredibly quiet. They've been too quiet, right? And I think that they need to take a piece out of some of these other low-budget, low-payroll teams in the league, similar to the Royals. Look at what the Royals are doing. right? They're another low payroll team. They're a team that struggled mightily this past year. If they didn't finish last, they finished second to last. They were right down there, bottom barrel team with the Detroit Tigers. They were one of the worst teams in the AL overall. And they've gone out and they've made great moves. They've been very active. And I think that the Pirates, they do have some good pieces, though. They've got Brian Reynolds, who I think could be, a major success in the outfield for many years to come. Cole Tucker, same thing. I think he's got a very promising future ahead of him. What are they going to do with Todd Frazier? Or, excuse me, what are they going to do with Adam Frazier? What are they going to, I don't know what they could do. They could maybe move Frazier around. I think that, he would be an interesting piece for them to move. Again, when your backup catcher, or excuse me, when your starting catcher is Jacob Stallings, who in all honesty should be a backup catcher for a lot of other teams, that does make me wonder. That does make me worry a little bit. Where is this team going? And I've been saying this for a long time. This Pirates team, Trevor Williams has already been cut. He's no longer with the team. Joe Musgrove has been at the center of some trade talks as well. So what are they going to do? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to rebuild? And if that's the case, in all honesty, and this might sound very crazy, and so Pittsburgh Pirates fans that are listening to this, please do not be offended by this, but I think that they could trade Josh Bell. I think if you got rid of Josh Bell, and here's why. As somebody in the front office with the Pittsburgh Pirates, you have to be aware of where this team is going. This team doesn't have any major superstars on the come-up except for Reynolds, I would say, and maybe Cole Tucker if he figures out how to hit. I think that's going to be, again, a big kind of if. And if they can figure out where to put him in the field, they've bounced him around everywhere. So I just don't know where he'll land. Adam Frazier is an interesting case. I think that he's a very, very interesting case for them to have. I just don't know why they don't go after some other pieces. Trade Josh Bell, right? If you traded Josh Bell, he's coming off a career season in 2019 where he absolutely had a monster year. So you could get a lot of money, or not a lot of money, you could get a lot of pieces for him, and you wouldn't have to pay him all that much money anymore. A team that I think would be very ideal would be maybe the Mariners. A team that definitely could use some hitting. He could be a DH. He wouldn't have to field because they've got Evan White already there. They're one of their first-round draft picks from a couple years ago, and he's a Gold Glover this past season, if I'm not mistaken. Not to mention, he doesn't have a great bat, but again, you can leave the fielding in with Evan White at first base. Don't have to worry about Josh Bell as a fielder because he's not a great first baseman. And he's got a great bat, so you could put him at a DH. I think if you traded him to an AL team and you went out and got a couple pieces, that could be a great move. I definitely think that could be a great, great move. I've seen a couple things about Musgrove being at the center of some trade talks with the Angels, the Blue Jays, and I think the Blue Jays would be interesting because they've got some pretty good pieces. They've got some young pieces that could be used for down the road. And I know that they've been one of the few teams that have expressed their interest in wanting to spend money this offseason. So if they do that, Josh Bell would be an ideal person for them to go after. So I'm very curious to see what the Pirates continue to do or try and start doing a little bit more because they've been, again, quiet, more quiet than a mouse. I don't know why they're not a little bit more aggressive, especially with a new GM. They need to be a little bit, bold. They need to go out and make some moves. And I think that hopefully once the new year passes, they can go out and make some moves because if not, it's just going to be another struggle in Pittsburgh. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that are getting sick and tired of the Pirates being the worst Pittsburgh team out of the three. So hopefully they can figure things out because if not, it's just going to be another losing year in Pittsburgh. But overall, some teams that have done some great things, some teams that have not done some great things. Very curious to see how these teams and other baseball teams also kind of continue on in this offseason. And another team that I didn't talk about much, but I've mentioned here and there during the show, is the Minnesota Twins. What are they going to do? Another instance where they can really go one of two ways. They can either have a major setback next year, or they can have a major turnaround from this past season. So hopefully teams start figuring it out here because sooner rather than later, we're going to have spring training, and then baseball season is going to be upon us, and it'll be too far too late, and these teams won't have, any time to make up for their lost time. So I'm just really, excited to kind of see what these, teams do and just really what the entire offseason has and really, kind of has in store for everybody here at home. So that'll close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll get into which teams I could see making major setbacks in 2021 and not taking the necessary steps forward that they should be. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all still here with me today. Jack Ridenour again. And in the previous segment, I jumped into talking about some off-season gradings and giving out grades for different teams in the MLB that I think have been either very active or very inactive this off-season. I want to now get into talking about some teams that I am personally a little worried about, and I'm a little unsure if they will, go in the right direction for next year, because there were some questionable things done by some teams dating even back to during the season, during the trade deadline, and during this offseason also. There's been some very quiet teams that I feel like they should not be that quiet in all honesty, but that's just me. Anyways, I want to get into it, and a couple of the teams I'm going to outline them right now and then dissect each and every one of them. But the teams that I'm very worried about right now, the Arizona Diamondbacks, Chicago Cubs, Cleveland Indians, the Cincinnati Reds, the Houston Astros, and the Philadelphia Phillies. I am worried about all of those teams for different reasons, in varying degrees, for a multitude of reasons, really, because again, I feel like they have not been making the proper steps to prepare themselves for 2021. And some of these teams, actually, I'm going to jump into the Diamondbacks here right now. This is a team that made a couple questionable moves back during the season. I was actually just reading a couple articles not too long ago about the deal that they made in trading Starling Marte away to the Miami Marlins, and I just didn't understand that. Why did you get rid of somebody that was batting over 360 for you in your lineup? Not to mention, he was literally the anchor in that outfield, and you really just get a couple pitching prospects from the Marlins, and then the Marlins wind up going to the playoffs. So I don't really know what their thinking was and what the thought process was on that, why they gave up Marte. Was not like he was playing bad. And actually, maybe this was kind of maybe they had a crystal ball and they were able to see into the future. When Marte went to the Marlins, his average dropped drastically. It went from 362 to around a 240, 245 clip literally right after the fact that he got traded. So maybe they were right about something. Maybe they saw something that was not trending in the right direction. But again, he was a major piece for them. They still have Ketel Marte, I will say that. But I think that they are not making the moves that they should be making. I want to see them get another bat in the outfield. I really want to see that, because they've got a really big power hitter in Cole Calhoun. He's got a huge bat. 16 homers, 40 RBIs in 2020. And then David Peralta actually had a very good year as well, batted above 300 with 30-plus RBIs. So two guys that they can definitely work with, but they need to go out and make a couple more moves. They really need to get some guys, because I think adding some major, outfield pieces, that could definitely elevate them in that NL West. It's going to be a tough division for them. And I want to see them go and get some more power hitting, somebody to complement Cole Calhoun. So somebody that jumps to mind immediately is Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber was just non-tendered not too long ago from the Chicago Cubs. So he's a free agent. Why not go after him? He's coming off one of the worst years he's had in his career, arguably the worst year he's had in his career. You could probably get him for a decent amount of money, but you would also have, a very high possibility of getting a lot of production out of him in the long run, because he's got a great bat. He's a year, 2 years removed from having a 38 home run season, so the guy can clearly produce from the plate. Then another guy that also came to mind, Robbie Grossman, another guy that could definitely fill that void out in the outfield. A solid bat. I don't know if he would necessarily be the power hitter that I would say Kyle Schwarber is, but you'd still have another added bat in that lineup to complement Cole Calhoun, David Peralta, Ketel Marte. They definitely have some pieces, and I think that's what's frustrating is that this is a team that has a capability of being good and that has, I think a high ceiling if they were to be a little bit more aggressive and make some moves. They also need to get more pitching. I mean, I think they need to really, really, really address that pitching issue because if not, it's going to be a struggle for guys like Zach Gallen. I mean, you go out a couple years ago and get Madison Bumgarner. This past season, he was atrocious. He had a losing record. He had over a 6 ERA, was not the Madison Bumgarner that we all know from San Francisco. And I think, that if they are able to really go after another formidable arm, another guy that comes to mind, and I know, in the last segment, really the two previous segments, I had mentioned about Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray. Well, that would be a very interesting thing if they went out, tried to trade for one of those guys, and got another arm to complement Zach Gallen. I mean, looking at their pitching rotation, 2 of the 5 starters they had a below 3 ERA, but the other three were above a 6 ERA. So there's a clear drop-off when over half of your pitching rotation has above a 6 ERA, and the other 2, again, they were the only ones, Zach Gallen being one of them, were the ones that were able to have at least somewhat of a respectable ERA. If they can find some solid power hitting and then get another, at least one arm, maybe if they are lucky they can get 2 arms to try and complement Zach Gallen, I definitely think that this could be a better team. And it clearly showed, this past season when they made some of the moves that they did, that they were kind of, I don't want to say tanking, but they definitely were not looking, I think, in the short term in a very positive direction. Maybe in the long term they were, but in the short term, maybe they were saying, hey, we're going to just start unloading some guys, try and free up some cap space, try and free up some payroll, and then maybe in the offseason we can go out and get some pieces. Would love to see that being done right now. I know we're approaching into the new year. We're getting into 2021. So hopefully they can figure something out sooner rather than later, because if not, it's going to be past the point of no return, and they're not going to be able to make any sort of moves. Another guy that comes to mind, Jake Odorizzi. I think he would be a great guy for them to go out and pick up off the free agency market. Really, I think that he would be a huge get for them. He's, not too far removed from an all-star year in 2019. Sure, he didn't have a great 2020, but if they can get him back to that form, that's another possibility for them in the pitching rotation that would really benefit them. I mean, really, really benefit them. So a little worried about the Arizona Diamondbacks. I don't think that they're going to really make the right steps forward going into 2021. But then the next team, the Cubs, I mean, this is another quiet team. This is a very, very quiet team. And going back to Kyle Schwarber, they've non-tendered him, so they've really taken that big power bat out of the lineup and out of the outfield for them. And then looking even further down the line, they also have to, I think, personally start thinking now instead of when the time comes, what they're going to do about Javi Baez and how they're going to fill that void at shortstop when he becomes a free agent after this year. And after 2021, he will be part of that big shortstop free agency class. And that's going to be a huge, huge hole in their lineup. There's going to be clearly something that is lacking, not only with at the shortstop and the defensive aspect of it with his great glove, but also his bat, because he is one of the better, I would say, hitters at the shortstop position in the entire league. Theo Epstein obviously stepping down, that might have some sort of an impact on what they're going to do for next year. Maybe they say, hey, this is a season that we kind of go back to the drawing board. Maybe it's a little bit of a rebuild year, whatever it might be. They're just clearly not coming off a great season. I mean, they had numerous guys that batted 220, even below the Mendoza line. And when you're a team that was not that far removed, I mean, 4 years ago, they were the World Series champions. And now this was a team that limped their way into the playoffs. And I really don't think that they've made any sort of necessary moves that they should be making to try and fix this and try and better themselves. I mean, going out and non-tendering Kyle Schwarber, that's problem number one. I mean, obviously, he's not coming off a great year, sure. But you still have so much power and so much potential in him and with his bat and with his ability that he could definitely do a lot of damage for, I think, a lot of other teams. And not having him there anymore, that could pose a problem. So I don't want to say it, I don't want to, jump to the conclusions and kind of jump ahead, but we might start seeing kind of a crumbling of the Cubs. This is a team that I'm personally very worried about, and I'm not really I'm not terribly concerned, but I think that going into next year, I am a little worried if I'm a Cubs fan on what are we doing? We haven't added anybody, and we've dropped a lot of people, and we're only going to start losing more guys starting in 2021 after the season as well. So they're going to have to start doing something sooner rather than later. The pitching's fine. Yu Darvish is doing a great job. Kyle Hendricks is a great second option for them. I want to see them get more hitting. The hitting was clearly lacking this year. The hitting was really non-existent, actually. So if they can go out, fix that problem, I think they're going to be fine. But overall, as of right now, I am somewhat worried about the Chicago Cubs. Now, getting into the next team, the Cleveland Indians. This is another team. Very concerned for them. Very, very concerned for them because of the potential for, a Lindor trade. Because when you trade Lindor, you're not, A, obviously not going to get him back, and B, you're going to lose a very good hitter and a very good glove. And if you're going to lose both of them in kind of the one player that he is, and you lose both of those aspects, that's always a big blow to anybody's lineup. You also lose Carlos Santana. So you're down two guys from the 2019 year, and Carlos Santana had a great 2019 year. And Francisco Lindor is one of the better shortstops in the league. Where they need a bat is in the bottom of the lineup. From about the 6 hole to the 9 hole, no one hit higher than 250 except Delino DeShields, who is now a free agent. So the one guy in your bottom part of the lineup that actually hit okay, and I'm using that term very generously, okay, because 250 is really not that great. But in regards to the bottom of the lineup, it was all right. He's now a free agent. So you really have a lot of different places that you need to address in this lineup. If you lose Santana, obviously that's a huge power bat that you're not going to have, but the outfield is what needs to be addressed. The power hitting was atrocious this past year. They had one of the worst, if not the worst, outfield OPS numbers as a whole the entire year. They had one of the worst, if not the worst. So they need to go out and do something about that. I know that they have expressed their desire to try and save some money, and if they do trade Lindor, they can definitely free up some salary space because he's owed over $20 million this upcoming season. So maybe you could use that saved money to go out and get a guy like Brantley. Maybe go out and get a guy like George Springer. You wouldn't be able to sign them for very long, but if you could try and fix the problem now, maybe down the road, you can either trade them, or you can either, again, maybe just have kind of this, I don't want to call it a rent-a-player, but just having guys for a year-long, 2-year-long contracts, kind of like what the Royals have been doing recently, and just try and put pieces together for 1 year. If it doesn't work, then go back to the drawing board the next. But I just really don't know what they're going to do in the outfield because it's almost non-existent as of right now. I mean, you got Delino DeShields, who's going to be a free agent, and it's just, they need to go out and do something about it. The pitching has been solid, though. I'm going to give them that. They had one of the best, I think, 1-2 combos this year in Shane Bieber and Zach Plesac. Shane Bieber being the Triple Crown winner pitching-wise, so clearly you've got somebody that is going to have a very, very long-lasting career. Carlos Carrasco also, he had a great season. Brad Hand now being a free agent, that is a little worrisome. He was your main closer, led the entire league in saves this past season. So that's going to be another void that they're going to have to fill. So there's a lot of things that this Indians team needs to do because if not, and again, it does not help their case when they're trying to save money. So as a result, and I understand why they're trying to save money. Obviously, this pandemic has really thrown everything for a loop. So I understand that completely, but I feel like another team that's very similar is the Kansas City Royals. The Royals are a very ideal team for these lower/mid-market teams to follow, right? Being able to go out, get talent that they can put in different places in the lineup, different places in the field that really helps the overall team and really benefits the entire collective instead of just going out and getting superstars, but getting pieces that they can build with. I think that's what this Indians team needs to do. Overall, I really want them to be a little bit more active because if not, the pitching's going to suffer, especially coming out of the bullpen. I mean, not having Brad Hand there is going to really pose a problem for late-inning situations, especially in a close game. Not having that arm, not having that go-to pitcher to have coming out of the bullpen, that's definitely going to be a hard thing for them to adjust to. So hopefully the Indians can figure out their finances and then try and act accordingly and go out and act and get guys that they can really line up with what their team is trying to do, but also what their payroll and their bottom line is trying to do. So another team I'm very worried about going into next year. And then this next team, the Cincinnati Reds, I think we all know why I'm very worried about this team. You could possibly be losing Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray. You already know you're probably going to lose Trevor Bauer in free agency since he's rejected the qualifying offer. Castellanos had a great start to the season, and then he really fizzled out of nowhere. And then Mike Moustakas was just bad across the board. So you have the two guys that you went out and got during the offseason a year ago, in Moustakas and Castellanos, really kind of playing subpar baseball. I'll give it subpar because Castellanos, honestly, was the better of the two, but he wasn't sensational as the season went on. He kind of actually digressed a little bit. And then you also got rid of, you're getting rid of Trevor Bauer's going to go, and then Raisel Iglesias, your closer, is also gone. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? This Cincinnati Reds team, I think they need to figure it out. For the most part, they're fine with the hitting, I think, although Eugenio Suarez has also been at the center of that trade talk with possibly the Nationals. So if he's gone, you still have Moustakas, you still have Castellanos. I think that Jesse Winker is going to be a big factor on this team, although if the DH does not go universal, I'm going to be very intrigued to see how that kind of plays a factor into his game next year and if he actually sees a little bit of a setback himself personally. But this pitching is going to be the main thing that's going to suffer. The hitting can probably figure itself out, but the pitching is going to be really, really bad. And for a team that was coming off a year where they were second in the MLB in team strikeouts, it's going to be a totally different rotation this year. Unless they're able to keep Castillo and Gray around and they don't decide to move those guys, and by an absolute miracle and prayer that Trevor Bauer decides to stay in Cincinnati, then they'll be fine. They'll be A-okay. Maybe Moustakas has a much better year next year. Castellanos continues to play pretty solid. If they can keep Eugenio Suarez and he can get back to how he was in 2019, completely different story. But that's not really trending in that way right now, and so that is what kind of worries me. I want to see them go after some more hitting just to be safe. I wouldn't say go out and get some big-time superstar, but just somebody that is going to at least potentially be there to slide right on in if, say, Eugenio Suarez is traded or somebody else decides to go, whatever it might be. Bring in that extra added bat just to be safe, And then on top of that, definitely need to address the pitching. The pitching is something that no matter what, they should constantly have in the back of their mind, because I'm sure the front office and the management all have in the back of their mind that this pitching rotation could be drastically different this upcoming season. So I'm very worried about the Reds, a little bit more so than I am about the Indians and the Cubs, because the Reds seem to really be trending in a negative direction, and they don't really have any sort of, I would say, positive kind of outlooks right now because of all the rumors that are going around about trading some of their better pitchers, maybe one of their power hitting third basemen, so on and so forth. So very worried about the Cincinnati Reds and what they're going to try and do this offseason and going into 2021 too. Next team, the Astros. Obviously, I'm very worried about this team, and it's clear because 2019, you go from being the best hitting team in baseball, having the number one team average and the number one team OPS, to then coming back the next year and having the 20th ranked average and the 19th ranked team OPS. Big time drop off. That was by far probably the biggest setback and probably the biggest drop off in terms of going from the top to the very bottom that any team saw from 2019 to 2020. Huge drop off, right? You're going from first place all the way down to 20th place. That is a ginormous difference. So I think that's going to be a big factor for them this offseason. How do they address that hitting, and how do they get themselves back into the swing of things, if you will? No pun intended. But now they also have George Springer to worry about. They also have Michael Brantley, two guys that have been major pieces for them in previous seasons, in World Series runs, in World Series wins. They're going to be walking. They're going to be going for free agency. So you're not going to have those two guys back in your lineup. If they can go out and get a guy like Marcell Ozuna, who I know has been linked to their team, that would definitely fit a lot of needs that they have to have. A, you could put him in the outfield because he has expressed a desire to go back in the outfield. B, if he didn't want to do that, and if your team didn't want to do that, you could just put him at DH because he would be a great DH. So I think that there's a lot of different things that they can kind of do with this team. I'm just very worried that when Brantley and Springer go, and then you have to also factor in that Justin Verlander is getting older. He's coming off of a year-long injury, so who knows if he'll go back to how he was at one time in his career. This might start, really becoming a kind of a rebuilding phase for this Astros team. They might have to go through a couple years where, they really have to kind of build their way back up into who and what kind of team they were before. because this is just not really trending in the right direction. And if they do start rebuilding, maybe you unload guys like Jose Altuve. Maybe you trade them away. Get some pieces for the future and try and build for down the road. But the hitting behind the plate was atrocious with Martin Maldonado. He had a terrible season. And so I think there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, but I don't know if they're being addressed or if they have been addressed or if they will be addressed, honestly. So I'm very worried about the Astros. Them and the Reds, I would say right now, I am the most worried about. And then probably a close second would be the Diamondbacks. But the Cubs and the Indians I'm not as worried about because I feel like they are well-ran organizations. No insult to any of the other franchises, but I just think that the Cubs and the Indians, they'll figure it out. The Reds, I'm a little bit worried about. The Diamondbacks, definitely worried about, and the Astros especially, very worried about. So the last team I want to mention and touch on that I am incredibly worried about going into 2021 that I really could see seeing some major setbacks are the Phillies. But I could also see them making a very drastic turnaround and actually eventually having a big-time improvement from how I'm viewing them now based on kind of some of the moves that they could make. And not to mention bringing in Dave Dombrowski, that's going to swing kind of a lot of things for JT Realmuto, I think. As of right now, what I've heard, JT Realmuto seems to be, the number one target for the Phillies and vice versa. So maybe he'll re-sign and he'll stay in Philadelphia, and if so, then I wouldn't be as worried. What I am worried about is the shortstop position. You've got Didi gone to free agency. He's probably not going to be coming back. But looking down the road even further, again, going back to that huge shortstop class in 2021, you could definitely get a guy like Trevor Story or a guy like Javi Baez or maybe even Francisco Lindor to eventually fill that spot. So if I'm the Phillies, I would take it one step at a time. Address the catching. Try and go and get JT Realmuto because you have to know that down the road in the offseason of 2021 in a year from now, you'll have a lot of options from the shortstop position that you could fill for the 2022 season. So I would definitely, without question, try and focus my attention on JT Realmuto because that is something that is going to be even harder to find in baseball, a very good hitting catcher as opposed to a very good hitting shortstop. There's plenty of those types of players in baseball right now. The catching-wise, not so much. I'm not really terribly worried about the youthful players that they have because Rhys Hoskins, Alec Baum, I think that they could be the players for the future for them for down the road for sure. And I think that Rhys Hoskins did have a little bit of a setback in 2020, but in 2019 had a great year. Alec Baum, awesome season in 2020. He was up for Rookie of the Year, batted above 330. Not a huge home run guy, but he produced very well at the plate. Not to mention you still have Bryce Harper. And yes, I don't know if Bryce Harper is kind of the same Bryce Harper from before, although he did start the season off very strong. So maybe he's still got something left in the tank. And then also, maybe go after some pitching. Jake Arrieta, he's a free agent, and he's clearly past his prime. So you definitely want to go out, maybe get some youthful arms, get some youthful pitching, and then down the road you need to look at that shortstop position because Didi being gone, that's going to really be, something that they need to kind of address down the road eventually at some point. But I would say, all in all, I'm worried about the Phillies, but depending on what they do, signing JT Realmuto, going out and getting some pitching, it's really just those little minor things, and probably easier said than done, but those little minor things that they can tweak that all of a sudden is going to completely change my outlook on this Phillies team because I think that out of all of these teams on this list, I think they might have one of the highest kind of outlooks or maybe even kind of the highest potentials out of any of these teams I just mentioned for going into 2021 and 2022 because of the potential that they have of re-signing Realmuto and then the potential they have of the young players that they have coming up through the rankings and on their team right now. Dave Dombrowski being there, you have to at least be somewhat confident that he's going to build a winning baseball team like he's done before for previous teams that he's been with. So I think there are some more positive things to look at for the Phillies, but still, all in all, right now, pretty worried about them and what they're going to do and if there's anything that they can do, for the next couple weeks because, again, before we know it, we're going to be in spring training and it's going to be kind of past the point of no return. So I'm really excited to see what some of these teams do, but I'm also very worried about them because if they don't start making these moves sooner rather than later, it's going to be a really long 2021 season for them. And I would hate to see a team like the Indians see a major setback or a team like the Reds who, they had not gone to the playoffs since the early 2010s, and then they go to the playoffs in 2020. I would hate to see them go back right to square one after, a pretty solid 2020 season for the most part. Definitely very disappointing more so, but still being able to make the playoffs, you make the playoffs no matter what. So I'm I am very skeptical and a little worried of these teams, but I think that if they can make the right moves, then they could set themselves up well for the future. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there, though. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will get into the best pitching duos in baseball right now. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the previous segment, I got into discussing which teams in baseball I am most skeptical about heading into next year, and which teams I could see really taking a step back in 2021. But I want to finish out this show discussing the best pitching duos in baseball and who have been the best and could be the best 1-2 punches in baseball. Some of these names on this list, most of you might say, well, they haven't really been on the team for that long, and you're right, they have, some of these guys, they've not been on the team very long, but still, being able to say that both of these guys, for some of on these respective teams have been that good and that they are, again, on the same team together, that is without question having to show that there are some duos out there that although they haven't been together for long, they can still be incredibly effective. So the first one I want to get into is David Price and Clayton Kershaw. Now, David Price has only been with he's technically not even played a season with the Dodgers yet, being, this past season with the pandemic, decided to sit out, opted out of the year. But David Price and Clayton Kershaw, when they are in full swing and when they're back on the mound for 2021, this is going to be, I think, a very, very tough 1-2 punch for a lot of teams out in the NL, especially in the NL West, to deal with. I mean, for David Price, you've got a guy that's been a 5-time All-Star. He's been a World Series champion. He's won it with Boston. He's been a Cy Young Award winner, and he's been the 2-time ERA title winner a couple times, once in 2012, once in 2015. But not to mention, you've got a guy that's got the capabilities of striking out at least 200 guys or more. 2016, he put up 228 Ks. 2014, he put up 271, which led the entire MLB. And then you look over at Clayton Kershaw, you've got a 3-time Cy Young Award winner. You've got a World Series champion, 5-time ERA title. You've got an 8-time All-Star, an MVP, Triple Crown winner. The list goes on and on and on. So the fact that you've got both of these guys, and I'm assuming that Kershaw would definitely be the number one option for this team, and then Price follows second, I mean, in a 3-game series, that's going to be a real doozy for a lot of teams to get through, whether it's the first 2 games of the series or the last 2 games of the series, whatever it might be. It would be a very challenging, 1-2 punch to get through. I mean, looking at Kershaw's numbers, and he's had numerous years where he has led the MLB in ERAs. He's also another guy that's got a high strikeout potential. A couple of years, he's actually gone above 220, 230. In 2015, he actually had a 301 strikeout number, which was good for the entire MLB league leading number. So an impressive statistic for, Clayton Kershaw. And I'm not going to lie, if, some of these NL West teams like the Padres, they're going to really have their hands full, I think, for years to come, because if Price sticks around for long and if Clayton Kershaw can stay healthy, then this is going to be a very, very tough 1-2 punch. And again, these two guys have technically not played together as of right now. So eventually they will play together. So when that day, definitely comes, this is going to be a very, very hard, punch for them to get, or for teams to get through. I mean, that's going to be a very challenging, first 2 starters to try and battle with. Not to mention, you've got multiple Cy Youngs between the 2 of them, multiple ERA titles, multiple All-Stars. Arguably, I mean, Clayton Kershaw will be a Hall of Famer. David Price, if he has another 2 or 3 really good years, you could even see him in the Hall of Fame. So you've got the potential for, again, one of the better starting lineups, I would say, pitching-wise in the MLB could be coming up in 2021 with the Dodgers. Again, we have not seen David Price really much in a Dodgers uniform, so we kind of don't have a great gauge of that quite yet. But when that day does come and he spends a full 162-game season with the team, same with Clayton Kershaw, I think we are definitely going to see, how formidable those first two guys can be in a starting rotation. So the next two I want to touch on, Justin Verlander and Zack Greinke. Now, if Garrett Cole was there, that would probably make the best three-man starting rotation in baseball. But since Garrett Cole's no longer there, Verlander and Greinke are still there. And Verlander, although I would say, is a little bit of a shell of his former self, he still has produced very well the last few years. 2019, he had a league-high 21 wins. He was an All-Star in 2018, 2019. He's been a multiple-time All-Star. He's been an ALCS MVP, two-time Cy Young Award winner, an 8-time All-Star to be exact, an MVP, a World Series champion. Again, the list goes on and on and on, and he is a very high strikeout guy. This is a guy that is going to pump up above 250 strikeouts in a season. And, you look at his numbers, he's had numerous years where he's had above 250 strikeouts. 2019, he had 300. 2018, he had 290. 2016, he had 254. In 2011, he had 250. In 2009, he had 269. So he's had some seasons where he's been absolutely untouchable. And not to mention, the ERA plus has been through the roof. In one season, actually, in 2017, it was 131. But when he arrived in Houston that year, it went up from 117 when he was with the Tigers to then 389. So a 200-point difference from when he jumped from the Tigers to the Astros. That's a pretty staggering increase in ERA plus without question, especially in the middle of the year. That's even harder to do. Then over at for Zack Greinke, it's another case where you have a little bit more of a strategy pitcher. It's not Justin Verlander who's going to try and pump it right by you. He's going to just blow it right down the middle, and he's going to challenge you. He's going to really test your ability as a hitter and see if you're going to be able to make contact with his stuff. Zack Greinke is a little bit more meticulous. He's a little bit more strategic in how he goes about his pitching. Also a Cy Young Award winner. He's a 6-time All-Star, 6-time Gold Glover, so a guy that's a great fielder also, which is always an awesome add if you have, a pitcher. Any pitcher that's able to win multiple Gold Gloves, that's always a much-needed add for any team because, think about all the little dribblers that go back to the mound or, little kind of in-between bunts that might go in between the pitcher's mound and the third baseman or the pitcher's mound and the first baseman. Having a guy that is quick off the mound, which, again, you have to remember, that mound is elevated, so it's probably a little weird when you run off the mound and then you go down to flat ground. That's probably a very odd feeling, but having a guy that's able to do that and is able to do that at a high level, that he's a multiple-time Gold Glove Award winner, that's a pretty impressive thing to share, for sure. And I think that, although Zack Greinke, his numbers are not necessarily that of Justin Verlander's, he's still been incredibly, incredibly efficient. Looking at some of his strikeout numbers, he's had a couple years where he's had over 200 Ks. 2017 he had 215. 2015 he had 200. This is a guy that's definitely put up some serious numbers in the past. He's jumped around from team to team, for the last few years during his career, being for the Dodgers for a little bit, and then the Diamondbacks, now with the Astros, started out with the Royals, was with the Brewers for a year. So he's done a little bit of bouncing around, but all in all, the guy has pitched incredible his entire career for the most part. In his Cy Young Award-winning year, he led the entire league in ERA+, not to mention he had 242 Ks, which was a career high for him. And then you go over and he had 229 and a third innings pitched. He had an MLB-high 2.16 ERA, and he had 16 wins. So he had a sensational season in 2009, and I think that was kind of the tipping point for this guy. He's, for the most part, I don't think he's all the time given the due credit he deserves. I think he's been in the shadows a lot of some of these other high-powered profile pitchers, Clayton Kershaw, Steven Strasberg, Justin Verlander, Garrett Cole, the list goes on and on and on. And so I think that he kind of falls by the wayside a little bit. He kind of is, pushed to the back of the shelf a little bit, but he's still an incredible pitcher. He's had numerous seasons where he's had very high winning percentages. In 2013 he was 15-4. 2014 he was 17-8. 2015 he was 19-3. Consistently losing below 7 or 8 games and then winning 15 or more games. That's pretty hard to do. And being able to be that efficient also shows the amount of run support he had. But Justin Verlander and Zack Greinke, although I wouldn't say that they are the 1-2 combo that David Price and Clayton Kershaw are, I would definitely still say that Verlander and Greinke make for a great, great two-man tandem in the AL and especially in the AL West. Now, the next two I want to discuss are Steven Strasberg and Max Scherzer. And Steven Strasberg, although he's been, I feel, I don't want to say he's been disappointing. I don't think he's been disappointing at all. I think that he suffered from a lot of injuries, unfortunately, and a lot of misfortune with just not having the best health, having a couple arm injuries here and there, having to get Tommy John surgery one season. He got shut down in the middle of one year because of his, potential for maybe being susceptible to getting Tommy John and having to have that. So the guy is definitely a very good pitcher, though. I mean, a 3-time All-Star, but he's a really high strikeout guy. This is a guy that he can really, churn out some major K numbers. I mean, 251 strikeouts in 2019 and then 242 in 2014. He had a couple years where he wasn't as efficient, I would say. In 2015, not a great season for him. But in 2016, 2017, very solid seasons for him. And his ERA has never touched 4. His ERA in his career is a 3.19, so a very solid ERA to have in an entire career so far. And then Max Scherzer on the other end, again, although Scherzer and Strasberg, they haven't been together for years upon years, still a good 5-6 years that they've been together. I would say that's plenty to definitely put them up on this list because, in my opinion, I would say definitely Scherzer is the better of the two, and he is the number one option. Strasberg is the guy who's been there the longer. He was the team's first overall pick many years ago, and I think that Scherzer is definitely the one that takes the cake of the number one option on this team, and rightfully so. I mean, three-time Cy Young Award winner, 7-time All-Star. He's been a World Series champion, and he's had some years where he's put up absolutely insane numbers. In 2016, he put up 284 Ks that led the entire MLB. 2017, 268 Ks led the entire NL. And then in 2018, he had 300 Ks, which led the entire league. And then this past year, he had 92 Ks, which was way up there. In 2019, at 243. He's had consistent, above 230 strikeout numbers from 2012 to 2019. So 7 years of 230 or more strikeouts. That's a lot of Ks to have in a season on a consistent basis, too. You have to remember that. I mean, being able to do that game after game, that's pretty hard to do. And these are guys, I mean, Strasberg, when he's healthy, he's capable of putting up some serious strikeout numbers. He can go out and give you 13, 14 Ks in an outing. Scherzer does it a little bit more consistently, but I would still say out of those two, those are two guys that are very hard to get through. And then you also have to factor in Patrick Corbin. He's been pretty solid for them as a third option. So again, going back to kind of how if Garrett Cole was still with the Astros, that would be the best 3-man pitching rotation. Well, in the NL, Corbin makes out, I would say, allows them to have not the best 3-man pitching rotation between him, Scherzer, and Strasberg, but definitely pretty solid for the most part, I would say, but not the best by any means. But Strasberg and Scherzer have definitely proven to be very needed pieces for the Nationals in many instances. I mean, being a huge part of their success in the World Series, that's also a major reason why. I mean, having that much success not only in the regular season but in the postseason as well, that also I think gives some of these pitchers a little bit of an added step up over others because when you go into the playoffs, it's a totally different situation, and those are two pitchers that have been there, they've done that, and they can definitely perform at that level. So I'm going to go with Strasburg and Scherzer. Then the next two, Syndergaard and DeGrom. Jacob DeGrom and Noah Syndergaard from the New York Mets. I mean, why wouldn't you put them there, right? Jacob DeGrom's been arguably the best pitcher over the last 3 years. 2-time Cy Young Award winner, 3-time All-Star, and he's only played 7 years. He's only played 7 years, and he's already done all of that. That's pretty impressive to do. Not to mention, he's led the NL in strikeouts back-to-back seasons. This year, he was one of 3 guys to have over 100 Ks. Now, Syndergaard's coming off a little bit of an injury. He's only been an All-Star one time, but he's got a ton of potential, and he's another guy that's only been there for 5 years. So these are two pitchers that could definitely see themselves in a New York Mets uniform for a long time. They've got many years ahead of them, and I think that they're some of the two more exciting kind of up-and-coming, bubbling to the surface duos in the MLB. And I think that eventually as Strasburg and Scherzer start to age out, we'll start to see in the NL East kind of a rising of Syndergaard and DeGrom as the new 2-man tandem in that division. I mean, looking at Syndergaard's numbers, and they've been impressive. He's had 2 of his 5 years where he's had over 200 Ks. His ERA has been pretty solid for the most part. 2019, it ballooned up to 4.2, but then in 2018 it was a 3.0, 2017 2.9, 2016 2.6, 2015 his rookie year 3.2. Now, where I think he struggles a little bit is the wins and losses column. He does have a lot of losses in comparison to the wins. I mean, 2019 he was 10-8. Now in 2018 he was 13-4. But then 2016 14-9. 2015 9-7. So again, I think you have to not look at that too in depth. In my opinion, I think that records are a little bit misconceiving in baseball because that is arguably, in my opinion, more of a kind of an insult towards the hitting. If you're getting a lot of losses but you're pitching really, really well, it just shows, and it's kind of revealing that the hitting is not supporting those starters when they need to. So Syndergaard and DeGrom definitely, I would say, are two of the better two-man tandems in baseball without question. But then the last two that I want to touch on that I think are, arguably, again, some of the better pitchers in baseball and really in the entire AL is Lucas Giolito and Dallas Keuchel. And I think that having both of those guys on the same team, I think is pretty impressive. I mean, you've got two of the better, I would say, again, kind of the more up-and-coming, I guess, if you will, pitchers. I wouldn't say they're necessarily in the same age range as Dallas Keuchel, as Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom, maybe a little bit. But all in all, I really, really like both of them. And especially now that you've got Lance Lynn there, you could arguably say that they've got now one of the better three-man pitching rotations again. I mean, Dallas Keuchel's had some solid seasons. He's had 3-4 straight years where his ERA's been under a 4, 2.9 in 2017, 3.7 in 2018, 1.9 in this past season in 2020. And then Lucas Giolito this past year, he had a pretty solid ERA, 3.4, but then his strikeout numbers were alarmingly high. He had 97 Ks, which was 4th, 5th, 6th in the MLB this past year. Now, Dallas Keuchel, not so many Ks for him, but still, they are two of the better pitchers. They are kind of a newer duo, being that, Dallas Keuchel just arrived in Chicago this past season, and this was his first year, so there's definitely a lot of kind of working out the kinks, I think, between those two. But all in all, those are some very, very good pitching duos, I would have to say, for the most part. And so I'm really kind of excited to see where some of these pitching duos go, where they trend towards. I would say Justin Verlander and Zach Cranky and Steven Strasberg and Max Scherzer. They're kind of aging out a little bit, slowly but surely. David Price and Clayton Kershaw are still right in their prime, but not much longer. But Syndergaard and DeGrom, Giolito and Keuchel, they're going to be the next big two-man tandems in baseball, I think. I think they've got a lot of potential. They've got a lot of hope. And if Giolito and Keuchel can stay in Chicago for a long time, there might be a lot of success in the White Sox organization. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. And hopefully Syndergaard can get back to normal health. And if he can, that's going to be a mean two-man duo with Syndergaard and DeGrom in the NL East. But again, a lot of pitchers that you could select, but I just picked a couple that I thought were just really outstanding duos in baseball. But nonetheless, we'll just have to see how they continue to progress and really improve as their careers go on and continue to, build upon each and every single year. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would also really appreciate that. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you all have a wonderful new year and have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.